Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us in today's webinar. The topic for today will be discussing how an industrial company, more specific, an engineering service provider to the energy industry, has achieved NHI security in their Azure environment. My name is Alberto Farronato. I'm VP of Marketing at Oasis Security, and today with me, I have the pleasure to have Roey Rozi, our Director of Solution Architecture. How are you doing, Rosie?
You're great, Alberto. Thank you for having me.
It's great to be on the same webinar indeed. Before we get into the topic of the webinar, I got to ask you, you meet with a lot of customers, and so how do you feel about talking about NHIs and NHI security with them now that Gartner has named machine identities, as they call them, the number one trend in identity access management for 2025?
I can really feel the difference. Like a year ago, we were talking about non-human identities, we were talking to customers. They understood the problem, but they knew they existed. They weren't sure how to approach it. But now everyone we're talking with is already super into it. They're thinking about it. They have some ideas on how they want to solve it. They have different requirements, and I can really feel the difference. Like I can feel it. It's top of mind to a lot of different practitioners, and I'm getting challenged all the time on we prefer to do it this way. We have a strategy to do it this way. So it's super interesting and getting more and more actionable and in depth, and we're going up the ladder. So that's really, really exciting for this year.
Yeah, it's great to hear because it is indeed a very important area, one that has been neglected for a long time. And yeah, so I think you're right. If 2024 was the year of awareness, I think based on what you say, all signs point to 2025 as the year of the adoption for a lot of people.
Mhm.
One of the questions that we get all the time, and really behind one of the reasons why we're doing this webinar here today, is that a lot of customers, a lot of companies are looking at this problem for the first time, and a very common question is, how do I go about it? As you said, people may have different opinion, but there isn't simply a standardized process or well-known best practices quite yet. Uh, and so, what better way to learn how to implement your strategy by looking into the successful path of some of the early adopters that we're very well familiar with, right?
Exactly. I think it's always best to learn from an example, to deep dive on one, see how they did it, what they learned, what were the key takeaways, and how they approach it so we can implement in other places.
Exactly. So let's set the stage for our audience by introducing the real life example that we want to talk about, the company and a little bit of their context. And we can't name them directly for security reasons, but we know them very well. And so tell us a little bit about who they are, what they do, and what the priorities are.
Amazing. So let me share my screen and do a little bit of a company overview. So this is an engineering service provider sort of industry. A lot of offices worldwide. Some of them are more headquartersy, some of them are like production plants doing actual work, and a lot of a global presence. Now, in terms of IT, I think they have an infrastructure that a lot of companies will be very familiar with. They are well into their cloud and SaaS adoption. I would say 70% into the journey, roughly. Um, and they chose Microsoft as a critical vendor for a lot of like whenever Microsoft can solve their problem, they are taking Microsoft. So Entra is their IDP, Azure is their main cloud. Most of their servers and machines are Windows based, and they're also leveraging the Microsoft Defender security stack wherever it is applicable. So leveraging a lot of Microsoft wherever they can be the right vendor. And a bit of more things that make them special in terms of IT is reliance on contractors. So a lot of IT contractors, both in security or different IT operations, and those are changing all the time. So they can be interns, they can be third-party companies that provide services, a lot of those. And based on this, their way to approach security is to, first of all, define well-defined policies and then enforce them, and also to automate as much as possible. They're big into automation all across the board and just always looking for new places to automate and make sure things are going smoothly so they can work in scale across the globe, different time zones, etc.
Very interesting. And so you would say this is a very common scenario that you encounter as you talk to enterprise customers, right? They're not necessarily something of an exception.
Very, very like standard. I think I saw a lot of similar companies choose Microsoft as the main vendor, and then it very often aligns to this kind of structure. Very standard,
Right.
very.
Great. So that's important because we want to choose an example that is applicable to a wide range of customers. I'm assuming even beyond the engineering service provider industry, right?
Yeah, very similar with all sorts of big enterprises that have a lot of legacy and a lot of physical locations will often look like this.
Got it. So tell us a little bit about what was their starting point. The starting point of the journey is always super interesting. Why did they engage with you, and what was their starting point? What was their initial pain point?
So they came to us with a very specific problem at first, right? They asked us about SAS tokens for Azure storage accounts. And they said, we're trying to solve NHI. They didn't call it NHI back then, they called it service accounts. We're trying to solve the service account problem. And then we found out there's different types. And specifically, we have storage accounts with access keys and SAS tokens in Azure, and we have no idea how to approach it. We don't know how to track it. And that's like a big thing we're trying to solve. So that's how they found us. And then what we did is we connected into their environment, and it looked a bit like this. So we created this sort of inventory of all of the different non-human identities that they have. Then for each one of these identities, we built with them this sort of graph, something that looks a bit like this, where you can see the identity in the middle, the permissions it has, all of the information on it, and from on the left, who exactly is using it. And basically the inventory and some kind of usage information, doesn't really matter how you show it, but this is the basics for letting you use policies to kind of enforce them, make sure they're happening, and make sure that you're not breaking anything while you're doing this work.
Got it.
Very
So
important.
it looks like visibility was the first big use case. That's something I hear all the time. Gartner mentioned, by the way, and other analysts as well. Why is visibility so difficult with NHIs, and why it's different from other constructs?
So I think there's a few parts to it. First of all, NHIs can exist in a lot of different places, right? So you can have NHIs in the cloud, in Entra and Azure. You can have them in different SaaS providers. You can have them on-prem, databases, etc. So a lot of different places. And then even just for creating a basic inventory, you have to do a lot of legwork to connect into everything. And then inventory, collect all of the logs into one place, different formats, different types, then prioritize. Then you need to be an expert in each one of these different environments, and just a lot of legwork that is hard to do across the board, especially that the number is growing so fast in the different types, and each vendor invents its own new kind of token and
Yeah.
change.
So is it fair to say that tracking NHIs manually is virtually impossible, that the first step of the journey should be to find a way, the right solution and tools and approach to automate a broad-based inventory of your NHIs?
For sure. If you have like any kind of reasonable or larger estate, you're gonna need some kind of tool to help you go through it. Otherwise, it's almost not feasible.
Yeah. The other question that I have for you around visibility, you touched a little bit on the graph. One way we talk about that in marketing and in the literature is context. Can you expand a little more on that aspect too? Because it seems like visibility isn't just about capturing the list. Great, that's step one, but visibility also requires to understand essentially what an identity is used for, right?
So the approach I think is most effective when working with non-human identities is the static information and the log information. The static information is all of the identities, what permissions do they have? Maybe you have some kind of enrichment information you can pull on them. That's the static part. And then there's all of the logs. When a new secret was created, where it's being used from, when the permissions change, if it's all of a sudden used from a different place, and then you have to correlate everything. So maybe a log in Azure will tell you, hey, here's an IP that's connected into this identity, but then you want to correlate it with a different information from your AWS or from your CMDB to say, oh, I know this IP, it's this machine, it's perfectly safe. So you have to gather a lot of data, correlate it, and build one view. And just building this is 80% of the way there. Once you've got that all sorted out, building policies, enforcing them, building automations, it's more steps you need to do them, but it gets much easier.
Got it. And my gut tells me that creating this context information is even more complex than it is to just simply track the existence of NHI. And NHI, correct, is one of those things where you literally have a blind spot if you don't have the right process and solution.
Otherwise, you can go chasing manually a lot of things, and you can do like a one-time project to figure something out, but it's a lot of manual work.
Got it. Okay, so this customer achieved visibility. Their starting point was SaaS tokens and expanded beyond that pretty quickly. What was their aha moment once they saw their inventory? What did they find out?
So we connected. We let the system run for a couple of days, collected all of the logs, and then we got that image, right? We saw everything, and we saw a lot of policies across the board that are just not happening. For example, we found hundreds of secrets that are used for privileged accounts that are not expiring or expire in like 200 years, those kind of things. Or we saw that about 70% of the identities were not in use anymore. And this makes totally like a lot of sense, right? Someone comes in, he needs an identity for a service. Great, we're going to give it to him as quickly as we can, all about the business, right? And then he's done with it after a week, after a month, after a year. What happens then? He just leaves. It's still there. Best case,
Right.
not used. Worst case, he can still reconnect because it's an internet-facing identity. And even though his personal account was gone, he can still connect. So we found a lot of these policies that are not being followed and that they deeply cared about. They were even well defined before we came in with these guys. And we went for an approach of solving them one by one from easy to hard. So we started with unused identities. Let's define a policy. Any identity that's unused for over 6 months, let's just close down. Disable, 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 disable. At the beginning, we did like one, which we knew was okay. We felt fine. Then we filtered all of the identities from a specific department, went to the department head, showed him, look, we're going to disable all of these. He went over the list, said, I think it's okay. Disable all of them. Of course, it's going to be okay because we know it's not in use for 6 months, and most of them for like 2 or 3 years. So we knew everything will be okay, but we kind of went through the process. After we've done it a couple of times, we're able to do it in bulk much, much quicker because you have the policy, it's well defined, and you go through it.
Yeah, I think this is interesting because initially you mentioned they relied a lot on IT contractors and service providers. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but this problem of stale accounts, unused accounts is very common when you rely on third parties to come in and do some work and then move out, right?
Very common across the board. Like a funny example we always find, we find all of the different tools that were installed in the past, third parties that are no longer there, different security scanners, backup tools, etc. You connected them like 5 years ago to do a backup. Maybe you stopped using the vendor, maybe it's no longer relevant. It's still there connected. They can still read all of it. Yeah.
So it's not just people, it's also other software that you may or may not use for a period of time.
Projects as well. You did some kind of IT project, no longer exists. All of the identities and workloads are still there. Or maybe even you close down the workloads because you have some kind of cost monitoring.
Yeah.
But the identities are still there. Employees who set them up can still connect. If it's a contractor, even worse, right? And
Got it. So this is super interesting. So I guess stepping back, they essentially the aha moment was a wide range of policy violations, for lack of better terms, in terms of what their own company policies were. that expose them to higher risk of breach. Because obviously, every time you have a stale account or an unused account, that could be, it's still active in the sense that if you can breach it, you can use it to do what that account was doing, but nobody is really paying attention to it,
Yeah.
right?
And it's even there's like another layer of thinking behind it. They put so much resource and time into human identities,
Mm-hmm.
and they got great results there, but then they're like, we didn't put any effort towards the non-human ones. And it's kind of like an aha moment where you're like, I only covered half the stack, maybe even less.
Got it. I also like what you said, basically, when you start addressing and resolving issues, which kind of is the third step in the journey, right? Visibility, then you identify issues and you start resolving. You went with a almost like a project-based approach that to me means also like prioritization. Is that what the general best practice is, like finding the easier things to address first, and then more complex later?
Yeah. So it's all about being effective, right? Most
Yeah,
banks talk, we started with easy and important. Then we went over to maybe a bit less easy, but also important, or things that are relatively important, but you can do in bulk. Kind
got
of
it.
mixture of them. And we went with a project by project and department by department to make it actionable and track the process. The fun thing about it is about 2 or 3 weeks into the process, we got to the point where the person who's run this is a junior resource. Um, it was easy enough, it was simple enough. Once you have the policies and the procedure, very, very simple.
Got it. And what are some of the measurable successes that they were able to achieve as they did some of these things?
So we went with a policy approach, which was really easy. So a first thing we did is like about 2 to 3 months in, we were already closed all of the critical findings, which is the heavy privileged external connections, all of those we were able to close in about 2 to 3 months. Then next policy was unused identities. We're able to clear 95% of those. Then next one was a long expiry certificate, tokens, etc. Clean up about 90% of those using the consumers and seeing who's using the tokens. And then we started setting up automatic rotation. So it's like a step-by-step process, and each time we saw the metrics converting over time, and really fun approach because you're seeing like every 2 or 3
Yeah.
you're reviewing, you're thinking, wow, look at all what I've done.
Yeah, it sounds like there's opportunity to get impact pretty quickly, like 2 to 3 months first results, basically. Once you have the right visibility, I think it makes a big difference, right?
Yeah, I can even share with you that if you have the right people on the first call, if you got the administrator and the guy, like the doer and the approver, sometimes you can get value on the first call.
Right,
But
that quick.
yeah,
Yeah, I heard that story before. Um, Really cool. So, okay, so visibility, then hygiene, with automation, higher degree of automation. Um, what are they doing now? What's the next step? It sounds like they've been on the journey for quite some time. What's their next use case they're going after?
so with these guys, there's two different areas which we're in. First one is expanding into more environments, beyond just Azure Cloud, expanding into on-prem and other environments. That's like a first step, but it's a bit more of the same. Like we already know how to run through it. It's great. But the second part, which I think is more important, is continuous monitoring. And this includes both policy violations and things that are all of a sudden out of process, even though they should be part of the process, but also anomalies and threat actors and leaked credentials in the internet and things like that. And then you can do this sort of thing, right? You can I'll share my screen real quick. So you can track the leaked secret, all of a sudden monitor it, say, hey, this leaked real quick, or a threat actor is trying to use it, and kind of quickly remediate it because you already have the policies. And when you're catching it 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 hours a day after it happened, the fix is much easier. The person who's responsible is still there, and you can fix it really quick. And it's not like a lot of legacy stuff that's left. So anomaly
Yeah.
detection, threat hunting, and keeping that continuous monitoring on all the time.
That's really cool because you hear a lot of, attacks and breaches and constant attempts. And so I guess their scope of their prevention broaden beyond just misconfigurations and policy violations, which to some extent is a little bit static, it to more of a dynamic, real time. Someone is trying to breach in, or a secret has been detected as leaked. Now I can proactively address it before bad things happen.
Exactly. And when you have the context and you already know how to use the tool, and you've got someone who's responsible for it and driving it, and it's being tracked all the time, super easy, and that's great.
Awesome. You hear a lot in general that NHIs, machine identities, are a cross-functional problem, not just a single team within the company. Many teams participate in this. What are you seeing in general? How are these guys addressing it? And if you can expand a little more also on what you just said about the more junior resources becoming an actual contributor.
I'll tell you what are the parties that are usually involved in this kind of thing. So you've got the person who defines the policies. This would be security architecture or GRC or some kind of combination of the two. And they have the easiest job, I think. They they just define the policy and then someone else has to go do it, right? Easy, define policy.
I'm sure they are your friends now.
Um, I'm joking, of course, but because you have to understand a lot of different things and track it, and they're responsible for it. But they say this is the policy, right? Go rotate, disable, don't expose secrets to afforded employees. Easy policies. And then you've got the person who has to actually do the legwork, make sure everything is happening, and actually enforcing it, make sure it's happening. And if the policies are well defined and you have the right tooling and you already set up off the architecture, you know what to do. So it's just making sure it's happening and it's on track. And this can be done by a junior resource very easily. They'll also have a great time because there's a lot of stuff to do, and they'll see the green bars going up, and that's great. And they'll have something to show their managers that they're doing good work. And
Awesome.
yeah, and finally, the last person is the application owners, right? So it's the person the business owner or the developer who's responsible for this application that's actually uh, the NHI, and they will be interacted with, but we try to make that as smooth as possible. It's like, here's a secret in this vault, fetch it programmatically from here, pick your vault of choice, etc. So we try to make it as easy as possible for them. Hopefully easier than what they're doing right now. And then they'll happily adopt the new policy.
So yeah. So that reminds me of similar technology adoption that I've seen in other areas, but this concept of increasing the level of automation, I think is super critical because the scale of these things is huge. And because there isn't really, like you said, it's a highly distributed environment with things happening simultaneously from bottoms up, essentially from the infrastructure. And so having the detection capabilities coupled with the automation makes a big difference in terms of return on investment. Is it fair to say?
100%. And at the end of the day, if you have a large enough estate, you have to define policies and automate it.
Yeah. Really cool. So before we close, love to leave our audience with some of the big lessons learned from this customer engagement.
Great. So let me share my screen again. And this is based on the summary view we did after a year with this team, right? So our three main takeaways were the importance of policies and that you have clear things to track. So you want to define them, you want to make sure you can track them, then you know what you need to do. Second one was assigning ownership to the project. Again, very process thing, right? Who is the resource who's responsible for getting these metrics up? Who is responsible for doing the integrations, for configuring the automations, etc. And then finally, the big thing that gave us the ROI is a mixture of cleanup and reducing the attack surface, making it easier to manage, reducing the attack surface, making sure less leaks, less issues. And then the importance of compensating control. So you still need to have detection monitoring up all the time to make sure that for the identities that still need to be there, still need to be in use with the different limitations they might have, that they're not being used anomalously, that they're not being leaked. And then you can feel safe and define this project is done.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Well, I really look forward to hear what will happen next with them. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for all the great info. And goodbye, everybody. It was great to have you on.
Thank you, Alberto.